Hey everyone, this is Friedel Hagaraja Raven. I'm here with my recap and review of Three Pines season number 1, episodes number 5 and 6. And again, because the narrative is basically using 2 episodes together in order to solve one particular murder mystery, I see no point in recapping episode number 5 and then starting with episode number 6, because it's basically the same story. So I'm like, you know what, as I'm talking about episode number 6, I'll give you guys a quick recap of episode number 5 as I go along. So personally, I wasn't a huge fan of this particular murder mystery. It didn't necessarily do it for me. Maybe it was because it was a very, very different setting. We weren't necessarily inside Three Pines, the little town that we are used to. We were at this hotel and it felt weird. I wasn't a fan of that. However, what I did enjoy was the development that happened in the Blue Two Rivers case. Now, the reveals that were shared, I was like, I want to know more, and especially after how this episode ends. So basically, the murder mystery deals with Peter's family. And in the previous season, my bad. In the previous episode, we saw that Peter was he was trying to handle a whole lot of burden on himself, and he was also going to therapy for it. So it turns out that, yeah, Peter belongs to a very rich family, and there's drama between the siblings. And in episode number 5, we got to find out that their dad, Charles, he died, and after he died, the kids and the mom ended up listening to the will, and yeah, he ended up leaving everything to the youngest daughter, I guess. Maybe she's the youngest daughter. No, she's not the youngest. My bad. She's basically the eldest daughter in a sense. So she ended up getting all of the entire estate. Basically, it was the family home, which was turned into a hotel. And yeah, the other siblings weren't happy about it, because Julia ended up basically cutting herself away from the family when she was like 16. And then we have Thomas, who was basically supposed to be the eldest son, and he was supposed to get the hotel and everything, but no, the dad ended up leaving things to Julia. And then we got to find out that the reason that Peter was feeling so much guilt about his past was that Julia ended up getting pregnant when she was 16, and her dad ended up like sending the child away. And how did the dad find out? Well, Peter over here, this little kid, Peter ended up, when he was like 12, he ended up leaving a scan of the ultrasound on his dad's desk, and yeah, Julia was shunned away and drama occurred. So anyway, this particular episode, it opened up with we ended up seeing this flashback over and over again. So in this flashback, Charles ended up taking the kids to the forest. He ended up basically like hunting down a deer, basically a male deer, and he wanted Thomas to shoot it because it's some sort of a ritual. And I guess Thomas couldn't do it, and it's insinuated that maybe Julia ended up doing it. But no, we got to learn about this kid over here, and there's this entire reveal about how he's connected to Charles and the rest of the children. And again, the murder mystery, it was serviceable. So, moving on. In the previous episode, we also found out that Thomas is under a lot of debt. He has a whole lot of people that he needs to pay, and he couldn't take it anymore, and he decided to take one of the rifles, and he's about to kill himself. And of course, Gamache goes in, and Gamache is like, don't do this, Thomas, don't do this. We can make this right. I understand that you're under a lot of pressure, but don't take your own life away. And as he's trying to make Thomas not shoot himself, Gamache also remembers how Missy ended up killing herself because she couldn't take the guilt of losing her daughter. And Gamache is like, you know what, I won't let anyone else kill themselves in front of me. And yeah, he is able to basically talk Thomas down from killing himself. And he's like, Thomas, you need help, okay? And then we get a scene between Thomas and Thomas's wife and Gamache. Thomas's wife's name is, I think, Sandra. I could be wrong. And Gamache ends up asking her about where Thomas was that night, the night Julia died, and where she was. And yeah, she ends up telling Gamache the truth that she was out in the kitchen. She woke up, she didn't see Thomas there, and she tried searching for him, but she was also like, she was hungry or something, so she went to the kitchen, and then she tells Gamache that, hey, I'm not the one who was lying, okay? Thomas was the one who was lying. And at this point, I think it's clear that Thomas and Sandra had nothing to do with Julia's death. Thomas looks at the picture of when they were kids over there on the wall, and he punches the picture. And yeah, Jean-Marie ended up going in and stopping Thomas. And yeah, you can tell that Thomas is under a lot of pressure. And again, as the eldest son, air quotes, as the eldest son, he has been through a lot of pressure, especially because he ended up, yeah, he really felt that he was a disappointment to his dad because his dad always told him that he was a disappointment, and they tried to calm Thomas down. Now, this was the scene that I actually liked. So mommy comes in and she has these medications that help Thomas calm down, and she goes in, she becomes kind to him, and then as she's being kind to him, she all of a sudden she's like, now all you have to do is confess to killing your sister. I was like, excuse me, ma'am, what the heck? It was, I really like the scene. I really like the scene. So you can tell that Peter's parents, they weren't the best parents. They weren't. So this is where Thomas comes clean about who he was talking to on the phone, and that he has a lot of financiers and investors that he needs to pay money back to, and then asks Thomas for his phone, and he's like, yeah, I was talking to people, they were in Singapore, but I ended up deleting that data. And I'm like, you know what, Thomas, that doesn't matter. Give them the phone. There are ways to get all of that data back. So Gamache goes in to talk to the mother, and Peter and Clara's there too. And this is where Peter is like, you know what? Remember when it was time for Thomas's bloodening? I think he calls it the bloodening, right? And the mom is like, yeah, he ended up shooting a stag, didn't he? And Peter is like, no, he didn't. He couldn't do it. And they're like, okay, so who the heck shot the stag then? And Peter's like, it was probably Julia who shot the stag. And as far as the Blue Two Rivers thing is concerned, which I was more interested in, again, the murder mystery was serviceable, but I am more interested in the Blue Two Rivers thing. So Kevin ended up contacting Isabel, and he's like, Isabel, I didn't end up killing Blue Two Rivers and her boyfriend. I didn't do it. And Isabel is like, but you were still the last one to see them alive. You have to tell me the truth. And yeah, they both decide to basically meet alone. And he's like, Isabel, come alone. No backup, no nothing. And Isabel agrees. And I'm like, Isabel, really? You did tell someone, right? You did tell Gamache. You did tell Jean-Ray. Did you? But no, she did. And then I'm like, Isabel, that was such a risky move. So we get to see Kevin coming at Isabel with a gun pointed at her. And this is where Kevin ends up telling Isabel the truth. So it turns out that they were pulled over on Pine Ridge Road, and yeah, he was almost home. But no, the police ended up catching up to them, and they were going through their cell phones, I guess, or something. And because Kevin already had a record against him, he decided to run away. And while he was running away, he heard gunshots. And yeah, basically, as far as Kevin is concerned, the police ended up killing Blue Two Rivers and Tommy. And now they're trying to pin their deaths on him. And Kevin can't have that. And this revealed that it was the police officers who ended up killing Blue Two Rivers and Kevin's younger brother. Like, that was huge. Again, this season, the first season as a whole, it's really looking, it's really like basically sharing the experiences of what certain like indigenous people have gone through. And yeah, we know. I mean, everyone basically knows that the law isn't necessarily on their side, but especially when you're a minority, and the indigenous people are minorities. But yeah, it's bad. And especially, again, the way that this episode ends, I really hope that we get some sort of a conclusion in season number 1, and they don't necessarily drag this out into season number 2. But with the entire police thing involved, I think certain narrative threads might go into season number 2. Let's see. Isabel is like, you have to talk to me, you have to talk to my boss, he's not like the other police officers. And Kevin is like, no, turn around, get on your knees. And I'm like, wow, Isabel, wow, you should have let someone know that you were going to meet Kevin. But anyway, of course, Kevin doesn't shoot her, and he just walks away, and he's like, I'm never going to contact you again. But he does. He needs help. Jean-Ry ended up taking Thomas to his room, and Sandra's there, and this is where Sandra realizes that Thomas is under a lot of trouble with investors and other people, and she's kind of relieved too, because as far as Sandra is concerned, she thought that Thomas was having an affair, and she was going on diets, she was injecting herself with things to look younger, and yeah, these two basically have a husband and wife argument, and Jean-Ry ends up, because after Sandra storms away, Jean-Ry is like, hey, don't worry about this, Thomas. the fact that she's still arguing with you, it means that she still loves you, but you need to worry about the day when the arguments just stop. Isabel ends up calling Gamache and she tells him about meeting Kevin, and that Kevin thinks that he's been set up, and Gamache is like, okay, this is more serious than we thought. Then we have the scene between Gamache and Jean-Marie, and you can tell that Jean-Marie is experiencing domestic issues with his wife. I think his wife's name is Enid. I could be wrong. And because Gamache has been married for 27 years, and they ended up celebrating, he and his wife ended up celebrating their 27th or 28th anniversary in the previous episode. Jean-Marie is like, how do you do this, Gamache? How do you do this? And Gamache is like, hey, not every marriage is perfect. Every marriage goes through rough patches, and it's just that me and my wife Renee, we make it work. And especially because of the line of work that I'm in, sometimes I do feel that I'm not there for her, but she understands that, and I try to make it up to her. And then he ends up telling Jean-Marie that, Jean-Marie, you need to talk to your wife. You need to talk to Enid about the situation that you're in, and the work pressure that you're in, and the relationship troubles that you're having. And Jean-Marie is like, I'll do it, but don't worry about me, Inspector. Because, as you said, it's perfectly normal for husband and wives to have such arguments. And I'm like, Jean-Marie, I think your situation is different. You need to go and talk to your wife. So Gamache has been having these nightmares, and then he ended up getting a nightmare within a nightmare. It begins with reliving the scene where Missy ended up falling to her death, and then he notices a bird, and then he feels that his body is turning into stone, and he needs to talk to a therapist. There's only so much that his wife can do, and his wife is like, Armand, dreams can reveal your deepest fears. What's up? You need to tell me. And of course, along with telling me, again, you need to go and see a therapist. So there's this entire thing about these little animal sketches that Charles used to do, and apparently each animal is supposed to represent a specific child. So there's a dog, there's a turtle, there's a cat, there's a stag, and there's a duck. But because Charles has four children, Gamache and his team are confused about who that fifth animal is for, and we do get to find out soon enough. Gamache goes and talks to Charles's wife, and he's like, do you know who the cat is supposed to represent? Is it you? And she's like, well, it could be the cat Lola, but I highly doubt it. It's not me. The cat is not me. Again, he has 4 children, 4 animals are accounted for, but who is the fifth animal supposed to be for? And this is also where Charles's wife and Charles's youngest daughter, they tell Gamache about how Charles, he made fun of the children. He ended up basically poking at them by changing his will on a whim to keep himself entertained. It was just bad. So Isabel over at her office, her actual office, she goes through the files, and she goes through what Kevin told her about being pulled over at Pine Ridge. Over at the hotel, Jean-Marie and Gamache are trying to figure out who that 5th person is, and they're like, maybe that 5th drawing is meant for someone who didn't get what they were promised. So yeah, they need to figure this out and quick. So while Thomas and Sandra are making up, this is where Peter walks in, and Peter is like, okay, so this is cute, but you do realize that our sister is still dead. And Thomas is like, again, it wasn't me, Peter, it wasn't me. And then we get this weird scene where Thomas ends up noticing the cufflinks that Charles gave, Peter notices the cufflinks that Charles gave Thomas, and Thomas is like, hey, Dad never gave you those cufflinks, huh? And Peter ends up, he grabs the cufflinks and he just runs away, and I'm like, what the heck, Peter? And then we get to see Jean-Marie tell Gamache that he ended up talking to Charles's lawyer, and this is where they find out that there was a 5th person in the will, but whatever Charles was supposed to leave that 5th person, he ended up hiding that name in an envelope. And but then when the actual time for the will to be shared came, that 5th person wasn't mentioned at all. And Jean-Marie and Gamache are going over Sandra's story, and they're like, well, if Sandra was in the kitchen and Julia ended up hooking up with Elliot, when Elliot came back into the kitchen, did he not notice Sandra? And they're like, you know what? There's something about Sandra's story that's not making sense. And while they're still deliberating, this is where they hear Peter and Thomas basically running after each other. So Thomas and Peter are fighting each other because Thomas is he basically is teasing Peter, not teasing necessarily. He's basically like attacking him emotionally, because he's like, "Hey Peter, how does it feel to be the person who ended up forcing Julia out of the family?" And Peter is like, I was a kid. You were my older brother. You were supposed to protect me." And Peter also basically asks Thomas how it was to be basically a disappointment to Dad and everything. And yeah, while these two are fighting, this is where Peter is like, he never liked me. He never once offered to buy an art piece that I created. And Thomas is like, well, at least you had your art, right? You had something to do outside the family. I continuously had to live under Dad's watchful eyes, and I continuously disappointed him. I was a lame duck. At least he ended up saving the drawing that you made him. And this is where they ended up confirming that, yep, the duck is supposed to be for Thomas. And again, we get a scene where Gamache is like, who is that fifth person? Who is that? So there are 4 children plus. Who is that fifth person? And Sandra is like, maybe he had an affair, huh? And Gamache is like, why would you say that? And Sandra is like, well, your mom told me on our wedding night that, you know what, like father, like son. So basically because Charles had affairs too, Thomas might end up having an affair as well. And this is where I was like, okay, so the fifth person is likely a kid that Charles had, right? And we get to see Peter and Thomas making up, with Peter giving back Thomas his cufflinks and these two hugging things out. So because Agent Nicole ended up showing up in the previous episode because she wanted to be part of this investigation, I think it was Jean-Guy, right? Jean-Guy ended up sending her out on perimeter duty, and yeah, you know what? That ended up working out. Gamache ends up talking to Charles's wife about whether he had other children, and she's like, no, never. Charles would never open himself to such a scandal. We also get this little scene between the mother and one of the daughters, the youngest daughters, and the mother wants her to be around, and she's like, no. With the inheritance that they left us, I think he left every kid like what, $20,000 except for Julia. Julia ended up getting the hotel, and yeah, she's like, you know what? I have $20,000 from Dad. I'm just gonna take my child Bean, and we're just going to travel for a while. And we have the scene between Gamache and Bean, and yeah, Bean and Never knew their dad, I guess. That's what I got from the scene. I could be wrong. And yeah, Bean is like, well, I end up imagining who my dad was. Actually, sometimes he's someone else, sometimes he's some sort of hero or whatnot. And Gamache is like, who is your dad right now? And Bean is like, well, my dad is kind of like you, a person who puts bad people behind bars. After reading the files, Isabel goes to this mechanic spot, and there's this woman there who runs the spot, and she has CCTV footage which Isabel wants to go through, and yeah, she ends up finding something big. From the footage, Isabel realizes that yep, Gavin did have the police after his tale, I think his story ends up being true about how the police are responsible for Thomas and Blue Two Rivers, Tommy and Blue Two Rivers' death. Maurice ends up taking Jean-Guy into Elliot's room, and this is where Jean-Guy, he finds these notes, and it turns out that Elliot was practicing his signatures on there, and it turns out that Elliot's name isn't necessarily Elliot, he's Liam. And quite conveniently, Jean-Guy ends up finding a shovel that has blood on it inside Elliot's cupboard, and I'm like, something isn't making sense. Why would Elliot hide the shovel inside his own room, inside the cupboard? Someone is trying to frame him. So because Elliot realized that something was up, he ended up running away, and as he's running away, Agent Nicole ends up stopping him because she was already out on perimeter duty. And again, I was like, I don't think that Elliot's the culprit. Of course, he ended up using a fake name, but he didn't murder Julia. And Elliot ends up telling Gamache and his team the truth about where he was that night and everything, but again, he wasn't the one who ended up murdering Julia. Kevin ends up calling Isabel again, and he's like, Isabel, I'm ready to talk to your boss. And Isabel is like, yeah, that's great. We trust you. My boss trusts you. So where are you? So Kevin is at some Vietnamese place, and he's going to wait for Julia and for Isabel. And Isabel is like, hey, don't worry. I'll be right there with my boss. Gamache is looking at the picture of Charles with his kids out hunting, and he's like, So there's Charles, and there are his like 4 children, but who took that picture? Peter, do you know? And Peter is like, it was probably Maurice, because Maurice used to tag along with us sometimes on hunting trips. And yep, something clicks, and Gamache is like, okay, so I know where this is going. So he goes into Maurice's room to talk to him, and Maurice is already packing, he's ready to run away, and Gamache is like, it was you, wasn't it? So Maurice is the stag, the 5th animal, and you can see that he also has the stag in his room that he was basically trying to repair or whatnot. He was lying about it being repaired, but it was in his room. And this is where Maurice is like, I'm going to run away, and he pushes Gamache away, and I'm like, why would you do that, Maurice? Why? And because Maurice can't really run anywhere, he ends up taking a knife and he takes Bean hostage, and yeah, it's bad. And Gamache is like, don't do this, Maurice, you don't have to do this. We can talk about this. And then we get an entire explanation about how Charles had an affair with Maurice's mom, and Maurice was born, and basically Maurice is the eldest son. So everything should be given to him by how the family works. But yeah, he was being ignored by his dad. And Charles did promise to give him something, but he never did after his death. And the entire Morrow family, they are quite surprised that, okay, Maurice is the actual bigger brother. And we find out that it wasn't Julia who shot the stag, it was Maurice. Again, the eldest son. And he was ready to step up again. He ended up telling the truth to Julia that night, and he was like, hey, I'm your half-brother. I've been managing the hotel. I can help you run the hotel again. I can help you. But Julia was like, you know what? You don't mean anything to me because I found my son that was given up for adoption. He's the only family that I have, and I just wanna step away from my past. I wanna start anew. And she just walked away while laughing, and yeah, that annoyed Maurice because Maurice had always dreamt of being recognized as a proper member of the family. And he ended up picking up a shovel and he ended up attacking Julia. And this is where Gamache is like, hey, I understand where you're coming from, but this isn't the way, Maurice. Enough people have been hurt, let the child go. And yeah, he ends up letting the child go because he is, like, Maurice is related to Bean. He's basically Bean's uncle. And yeah, but Maurice has to answer for his crimes, and he gets arrested. Kevin tries calling Isabel again, and Isabel, for some reason, because I guess the plot wanted her to do that, for some reason Isabel left her phone in the car while Kevin is calling her, and I'm like, why would you do that, Isabel? Why wouldn't you take your cell phone with you? And while Gamache and Isabel are going to go and meet Kevin, this is where Gamache gets a call, and Gamache is like, yep, it turns out that entire fight scene thing that was planted in Kevin's house, there was never a fight. So yeah, you can tell that authorities are basically involved with Blue Two Rivers murder. And we get a scene where Maurice is told to take a picture of his half siblings while he isn't part of the picture, and it was so sad. And I'm like, wow, Charles was a very, very toxic man. Isabel and Gamache make it to the Vietnamese place, but yeah, Kevin isn't there anymore. And I was like, wait, did Kevin get kidnapped or something? Understandably, Kevin was trying to run away, but no, the cops showed up and stopped him from running away. And this scene where he says Isabel's name because he wants to talk to Isabel, because at this point he knows that she's the only one that can protect her correctly. And yeah, he keeps on calling her name, but it's basically too late now. Gamache gets a call about Kevin being arrested, and yeah, both of them rush towards where Kevin is being held. And drum roll, dun dun dun. Kevin is already dead. Someone ended up killing Kevin. So yeah, this is where the episode ends. Again, the murder mystery with the Morrow family. Okay, it was okay. But what happened with Kevin and the entire Blue Two River mystery case? Like, a lot happened, and I'm looking forward to seeing what the writers have planned for the final 2 episodes, and I really hope that this show comes back for season number 2. Here's to hoping. Let me know what you thought of Tree Pines season number 1, episodes number 5 and 6 down in the comment section below. When did you realize that Maurice was the 5th person and that he was related to the Morrow family? And yeah, what do you think is going to happen in the final 2 episodes? Let me know. And until next time, stay happy, stay safe, stay blessed. See you guys later.